and thank you all for joining our PFF session today. I know it's probably your lunch hour and also Friday, so really appreciate your time today and to kind of sit with us here and talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and the diversity statement, which is an area that PFF provides quite a bit of resources about, but we decided it's really helpful to have a webinar session where we really kind of take some time and reflect together on how to develop a diversity statement and why it's important, and really just offer an opportunity and a space for us to kind of think about how this can be used both kind of in a professional setting as well as beyond. So really excited to welcome you all. And my name is Lizbeth or Liz Bayardo Cardenas. I'm a PFF fellow. Really fortunate to be working with our team and fortunate to have our co-host with me today, which is Holly Eva Allen, who's also a PFF fellow. So I see folks are still joining the line. So welcome everyone who's joining in. And we're going to just jump right in because we do have a pretty full agenda in terms of what we would like to get out of this session today. But feel free to ask questions in the chat. The plan today is to have this be somewhat of a working reflective session. So I will be sharing some information with everyone, but really the opportunity is also to just use the session to kind of reflect on your own ideas, your own experiences, and walk away with some useful information that you could use towards developing or further developing your diversity statement. So with that, I'll pause if anyone has any questions before we get started. Does anyone have any immediate questions? Okay. I don't see any, so we will get started. And then before we start, I also did want to share that this is a safe and trusting space that we're building for PFF. So we do recognize that this session is being recorded. However, we do welcome you all to create a very safe and welcoming environment. If you respond to someone else's reflection on any of these areas, whether it's thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, ensuring that your responses and reflections are respectful and create a safe space for all of us to share. The session is recorded. However, we won't be sharing videos or names within the recording, so do want to recognize that. And as far as our goals for today, so as I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the session, our goal is to share some information about the diversity statement. This is really kind of a ground zero session. So wherever you are in your diversity statement, whether you're just kind of starting to think about it and learn about it, whether you already have a diversity statement and it's really an opportunity for you to further develop your current diversity statement, we're really starting kind of with the bare basics on why a diversity statement is needed. And then we want to explore some of these terms that are important to incorporating your diversity statement. The DEI kind of term of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm also adding justice, so moving kind of towards our JEDI lens and really thinking about these terms and how they're important to consider when writing a diversity statement. And the second two sections are really more of kind of the applied piece. So we want to think about the use of the diversity statement, but also how this really supports your own reflections and articulation of your own identity, of your positionality, of your lived experiences, and how you support in your position, either as a teacher, as a scholar, as a leader in different spaces. And as part of that, what we'll be using is a worksheet. So Holly will share that in the chat for us. I'll also share the link in the slide. If you can access the slides that have the link directly, but we'll kind of give a couple different options as far as how to access that worksheet. And that worksheet is really an opportunity to begin articulating the different ways that you either teach, if you're in a teaching setting, if you're in an applied practice setting, different ways that you model justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion within your own respective spaces. And we have a couple questions that we'll be asking. So that worksheet will basically kind of walk you through all the different aspects that you want to think about for the diversity statement. I do want to recognize that with PFF, we have a lot of great resources on our website for the diversity statement. And there is a more comprehensive workbook that you can also access. There's access to a lot of our slides and additional information. But this worksheet is just kind of a quick tool for us to use for today. And also as a kind of an opportunity to develop a document that you could walk in for a session with us. So you can kind of use this as kind of an initial sketch, reflection sketch, and bring it into a working PFF session during our office hours that you can book with us, and I can share more details about later in the session. And if you can see on that worksheet, there is a couple different category questions. So I'll be sharing those questions directly on my slides. You can also see them on that worksheet. And then you can either use the worksheet directly, so download it, and you can type in your responses during the session directly in that section that has the notes section. Or if you would prefer to journal and just kind of write your notes on a piece of paper, you're welcome to do that as well. We will have those questions available to you as I present the slides. So I will pause here. And is anyone unable to access the worksheet? I don't see any issues, so hopefully you all have that in front of you. Okay, I think we're ready. Got it. All right, thank you, Heidi and Michelle. I'm glad it works. Okay, so let's move on to the actual information that we'll talk about. And I wanted to first kind of just start us off with just thinking really broadly. And I welcome anyone to unmute themselves or share their comments in the chat. What are your ideas and understanding of what is a diversity statement and how have you used it? If you would like to share with the group kind of what you feel a diversity statement is, you're welcome to share in the chat as well. Would anyone like to share their thoughts on what is a diversity statement?
Hi, I'll share.
Thank you, Ashley.
Hi, I'm Ashley Watterson. I'm a first year student in DBOS. My thoughts on a diversity statement are an opportunity for whether it's a person or an organization to show their commitment through obviously doing the statement, but also a way that shows the way that they act on those through their practices, through their behaviors. So it's kind of showing this commitment to how you plan to incorporate diversity, or this JEDI, I don't know if that's how you said it, but justice, equity, diversity, inclusion into what you do. So it's expressing that to others, and it's an opportunity for it to be a statement that helps to hold you accountable.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. That's a great response. Anyone else would like to share? And I do see some comments in the chat. So thank you all. I think you all highlighted a lot of different areas. So Ashley, I heard a lot of great aspects of the diversity statement and how it's partly a vision and a way of articulating to others of where you stand in terms of your commitment to diversity, and also a plan, right? So I heard your noting of specific actionable ways that you support diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice within either an organization or within kind of your own individual position, or ways that you teach, lead your organization. So that's a really great response. I see others here highlight vision, commitment. Stephanie agrees with you, Heidi. Other ways and comments about your approach to diversity and inclusion in your work shared by Laurice. So thank you all. Those are all great ways. Again, I think we're all aligned as far as our understanding of the diversity statement as an opportunity to articulate your position and intention and vision and actionable ways that you support JEDI or justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion within your spaces. So thank you all for sharing that. All right, so before we kind of talk about the different terms and how they may apply to your own position and experiences and ways that you support diversity, equity, and inclusion in your own spaces, did want to just kind of just share some key ways that just generally a diversity statement is used. So many, it's mainly used and historically has been used quite a bit in our academic institutions. So as part of kind of graduate admissions, fellowships, grants, awards. It's a key tool that you use in faculty positions and partly also as part of your promotion and tenure. But interestingly, it's also increasingly also being used quite a bit in non-faculty spaces. And it's not only can be an individual statement, but it can also be developed as an organizational statement. So there's many different ways that that this diversity statement can be used. And it's a great tool that one can use to really articulate their own position with their own communities, develop partnerships and allies that support the same vision, and is really an opportunity to kind of share it with others. So this is different ways that it can be used. And it's important because it does present, as you all shared, your own position and approach to promoting inclusion and equity within your respective spaces. It also demonstrates awareness on specific issues. So if there are core issues that either as an individual or organizationally you support, it's a really great way to demonstrate your awareness on how they're being supported. And it also is an opportunity to describe actionable ways that you're either presently, in the past, or in the future engaged in supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion within research, teaching, and service. And some key elements that I wanted to highlight as far as a diversity statement, we get a lot of questions about what should you include in a diversity statement. And again, this is a really kind of individualized document that is specific to either the individual or the organization. We'll focus here mainly on thinking about the diversity statement for teaching practice and for individual, like your individual diversity statement. And it's really an opportunity to share your own learning and development and perspectives, how you interact with students or others to support an inclusive and equitable learning, and ways that you engage in research, training, and service and leadership that really supports diversity, equity, and inclusion within different spaces. So these are the different key elements. And reflecting back or thinking back to that worksheet, we will have our first reflective question. What I may have not mentioned at the beginning is we're kind of chunking these different sections. So the first piece of this reflection is to think about diversity and why it's important to you. So as part of that, we and kind of thinking of this through an educational lens, the main reason why diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice is important for colleges and universities and moving towards our JEDI lens is really to enhance student learning outcomes, to ensure that all students have equitable and inclusive environments to support their learning, which will, as a result, improve student learning outcomes. So that's really the end goal as far as why these terms are important in educational settings. And before we kind of jump into this first reflection tool, one piece that is helpful for me that I like to share with others as far as just how we want to think about these terms, because I do recognize that they sometimes intersect and we can kind of sometimes use these interchangeably and sometimes incorrectly. One easy way to think about these terms is to think about diversity as a descriptive word that describes different groups, different forms of identity, different ways that you ensure individuals who represent different forms of diversity are reflective and included in your own leadership, research, educational practice. Inclusion is a more of an action-oriented word, so it's really focused around a specific action that you take to ensure that diverse learners are supported equitably. And justice is also an action-oriented word, so there's a specific action that you would take to ensure that you're supporting diverse learners or diverse individuals. And equity is an outcomes word, so as a result of your position and action around justice and inclusion, you support in equitable environments and equitable learning and other forms of equity. So those are always helpful to kind of think about as you frame the way that you describe these terms within your statement. I see a comment in the chat. Yes, so Leslie, we will provide those, and Holly will share a link in the chat for the slides. All right, so we're going to move into our first reflective question. So as I mentioned, there is a worksheet. You're welcome to write your reflections within that specific section of the worksheet, or you can also just write them on a piece of paper if you prefer to just kind of journal. And this is the only question that has two different questions, because you can reframe it a different way, but you only need to respond to it once. The first question is, if you can describe or kind of reflect on what did your educational experiences show you about diversity, equity, justice, and inclusion. You don't have to describe all of these words, but if you want to just kind of touch on some, if you want to just kind of talk about your own educational experiences. The second way that you could think about this or answer this question, if you're more in the learner space, is what did you learn about diversity, equity, justice, and inclusion as a result of your experiences as a learner? So you're welcome to choose one question and respond to that question, and I'll give everyone about a minute to reflect on that. I think we just hit a minute. Would anyone like some more time? Don't see any. Okay. So this is a pretty broad and potentially a big question to ask. So if you feel stumped, don't worry. We have plenty of time to kind of think through this. And if this is a question that you want to kind of take with us to a one-on-one session, I'm happy to meet with anyone or our PFF fellow team to kind of further dissect this question. But if you do have some reflection and ideas that you would like to share with the group, I welcome anyone to kind of share their reflection with the group if they would like. And I see a hand raised from Stephanie. Stephanie, do you have a question?
No, you said if we wanted to share. So
yeah, of course.
Even before I went back to the sheet to look at the question, when you said it, the first thing that came to mind was that just because a faculty member has a particular like socioeconomic position or comes from a certain socioeconomic position or ethnic position or whatever, like that doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to embrace the things that we normally see in a diversity statement, that they're going to embody the things that if they have a diversity statement might state. I have had experiences like that, one in particular that like the professor was always telling us like, oh, I come from a working class background, and I, like giving us to understand that she understands the struggle, and then would turn around and be like incredibly cruel, like not even just like tough, but just like not nice, like where other faculty was like, okay, no, that was like actually really inappropriate. So I think that that's something that we think, oh, they have a diversity statement and they say this and this, and they're like me, they're women, or they're my same ethnicity, or my same like gender identity or whatever, right? But then it doesn't come out that way. So I've learned to temper my expectations about diversity and equality and inclusion. Academically, CGU has been very different in that regard for me, but in my past experience, that's the first thing that came to mind.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Stephanie. And I appreciate you kind of highlighting kind of your own experiences with it. I think one theme that you brought up that's really important is just how, a diversity statement is still a statement, right? So I think it does, it doesn't fully kind of reflect the individual and kind of provide an actual view of that individual and why it's so important to be authentic in your diversity statement and ensure that what you're describing for yourself is actually really core to what you've either done in the past, what you've experienced in the past, and what you're currently doing, right? So I think it's one space to kind of write about it, just kind of for what you want to hear versus what is actually authentic to you. So I do hear that piece of just the importance of authenticity when it comes to both kind of sharing and understanding a diversity statement that is shared by an individual. So thank you for sharing that. Any other reflections or comments anyone would like to share?
I'll just share really quickly that I think to add on to Stephanie's point that diversity, I think a lot of times we think about diversity in terms of things like whether that's race or sexuality or religion, but also diversity it can be about perspective and background and experience. So it's not just about how do we categorize people, but recognizing that people have diverse experiences and perspectives and values that we need to be thoughtful about.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm not sure if I captured the name of who just spoke.
Sorry, that was me, Ashley.
Ashley, okay. Yeah, that's a great point, Ashley. I think we in terms of diversity and how we define diversity, it's a very tricky term to define because there's just so much intersection and opportunity to really think about diversity holistically and not kind of categorize it into terms of race or gender or ethnicity. There is an opportunity to really look at it from an intersective way and to really kind of think about it holistically when it comes to how this can provide opportunities for equity and inclusion in learning environments. So do really appreciate you sharing that. I see some comments in the chat as well. So Laurice mentions here, faculty, staff, and students accustomed to receiving unearned social privileges respond with confusion, uncomfortable with assuming a more equitable hierarchical position within spaces guided by more socially just practices. That's a really great point, Laurice. And I think it is really important for us to think about when we either kind of guide individuals in thinking about diversity statements as well as kind of developing our own. And Jordan mentions what works for one does not work for all regarding learning styles or accommodations. And that's also really important to think about when it comes to thinking about inclusion and supporting learning environments and accommodating for learning environments. It's not a one size fits all approach. It really depends on just how we approach it and really think about it thoroughly for our classrooms and describe it within our learning, within our diversity statement, and how we kind of develop different methods and ways to support individual learners. So we will kind of talk about that in our inclusion kind of section of this presentation, but really appreciate that as well. So we're going to move on to the next one, just because I do want to make sure we kind of get through these different areas. So if folks are okay with that, I will move on to the next section, but thank you again for sharing your reflections. One piece that so now we're kind of going to just briefly kind of talk about these terms a little bit, and just, I think it was Ashley who talked about just the different ways that we can see diversity and how it's really challenging to categorize it into one dimension or one kind of way, right? So diversity can be has a lot of different facets, has a lot of different perspectives, has a lot of different forms of identity, and also can be very intersectional. So when thinking about diversity, that is kind of part of the complexity behind it, is that we cannot just define it as one thing, but really looking at it holistically and understanding kind of some of the systemic biases that diverse groups may be experiencing, that result in different forms of marginalization, oppression, and do not have full access and opportunities to succeed. So we call these systemic biases. We can call these different forms of discrimination. We can call these different forms of racism and other forms of isms. And these are important to consider when thinking about diversity and ensuring that as part of that diversity statement, we not only reflect on our own experiences, but also on how we support diversity within our own spaces to ensure that diverse individuals do have equal opportunity to succeed based on kind of our position and support that we, as leaders, educators, and scholars provide. So I wanted to highlight some of these aspects of diversity. The piece here, and this again does not kind of paint a full picture of diversity and kind of the different perspectives and other kind of forms of identity, but some of the key dimensions that we want to think about include diversity when it comes to age, when it comes to ethnicity, so sexual orientation, gender, religion, all these different aspects that shape individuals' identities, and kind of diversity within our classrooms, within our own spaces, and how these dimensions can result in different forms of biases that can be racial and ethnic bias, gender bias, religious bias, ageism, to sexism, heterosexism, and ableism. So there's so many different ways that diversity can be reflected and can also have many different facets. And for this piece here, and thinking about diversity, it's hard to kind of categorize these, and I do recognize that. So with this question, we pose a question of thinking about specific issues when it comes to biases and how you're committed to these issues. Another way that you can also see this is to think about how you support them in terms of their intersections. So you're welcome to kind of reflect on this question on however it seems most relevant to you and to kind of your own experiences. But if you can just reflect on the question of why is diversity important to you, and you can think about specific issues that you feel strongly and are committed about, and how you address your commitment explicitly. So if you want to reflect on that. I'll give folks about a minute. And you're welcome to ask any questions or also share comments in chat.
So Liz, there's a question in the chat. Someone wants clarification on what ableism is.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't see that one. Thank you, Kim, for that question. I did see a response from Stephanie, which is correct. So when, so basically it defines individuals who are not, there's like some form of a bias or discrimination against an individual who is not able to do a specific action. And as a result, there's some form of bias that they're unable to do it because of their inability. Thank you, Stephanie. Does that answer your question, Kim?
I think so. I'm a little unclear on what the parameters are. Is it ability for, any sort of thought or action, or is it mainly focused on physical issues? I guess that would help to know a little bit more what the parameters include.
That's a good question. I actually don't know if we have defined parameters. I'll turn that to my team. I don't know. I think I see Shelby on the line. Shelby, do you happen to know if there's any specific parameters to ableism? I see Jordan here has mental health, learning disabilities, physical disabilities. I don't know if there is an actual parameter that I'm aware of.
Sorry, I missed the question. I was in the chat. What ableism is?
If there's specific parameters around ableism.
I don't know off the top of my head if there's any like official parameters of what counts and what doesn't. Holly might actually be able to speak more to that than I can, because I think this is kind of more in Holly's wheelhouse.
So it's pretty encompassing. It's any type of ability. So any type of judgment cast on someone due to their inability to do something either at all or the same way or without difficulty or pain. And it encompasses physical disability. It encompasses basically your age, chronic illness, also mental diagnoses or disability. So it's pretty encompassing. It's a little bit hard to give specific parameters, but it's probably best to assume it encompasses more rather than less.
And it's a good question, Kim. I'll definitely kind of go back to our team and see if there's actually like a defined parameter for it that I'm aware of. There is not, but I think what is being shared in the chat by folks, as well as what Holly and Shelby have shared, include a lot of good examples of just the different areas that we can consider.
Yeah, and I guess part of it too, for me, is I'm thinking there's a sense that part of it is it's an innate issue that somebody, for no reason of, for no reason that's, I don't even know how to describe it. I guess there's a distinction between somebody who can't do something because they were, born without a particular ability, or because they had, came up through an educational system that didn't prepare them properly. I mean, that's the sense I have about it. So I was just trying to, make sure I was on the right track with that. As compared to something like, if you ask somebody who's not an engineer to do engineering, it makes sense that they can't do it. We shouldn't look down on them for that, but it's understandable that they can't do it. I'm not sure I'm making any sense. I'm just trying to get a better intuitive sense of what it means and what it includes.
Yeah, thank you, Cam. And no, I think you raise a good question. And I think it's mainly centered around ableism when it comes to, and I see a link in the chat by Jordan, but it from what I'm hearing from folks and what Holly has shared, it's more focused around kind of physical, mental abilities or disabilities that individuals may have, that they can experience forms of bias around as a result of that. And I see a link in the chat from Jordan. I would love to open it, but it'll move my slides in the presentation. So I do welcome you to open that and see if that helps kind of provide some more clarity. And if it's still not clear, I'm happy to kind of think through this further, and definitely can share more resources offline if it helps.
Yeah. So, well, thank you very much. I'll definitely look into it a bit more, and thank you for the links you've provided.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. Thanks for the question. Okay, so I think we have kind of hit our time here for this section. Does anyone want to share just a quick reflection on this, or any comments, ideas? Now we'll move on to the next one. So I just wanted to kind of close, and I do see a chat from Stephanie. So Stephanie's kind of discussing learning disabilities. Thank you, Stephanie. And this is actually one of Holly's areas. So Holly's sharing some additional areas. And we actually have a session that Holly's leading around that, so we can kind of talk a little bit more about these aspects. But thanks for sharing that information, Stephanie. Okay, so the other, and I'm looking at our time. I just want to make sure we have some time to kind of reflect on the last question. So I'm going to kind of go through these next slides just to kind of open up some ideas for you all, and just how this resonates and it kind of reflects your own experiences if it does. But some aspects I want to talk about is around inclusion and how inclusion is important to removing barriers for access and success. Some different practices on ways to engage on the diversity of individuals, on the diversity of the mind of the individual, and how individuals can be supported in their own learning, and really ensuring that we support in inclusion through openness, curiosity, and respect for differences. So one tool that we always recommend as part of kind of our resources is as UDL. So we do want to highlight that as one of the ways that we can support all students and kind of develop different opportunities to learn and flourish. We don't have time to discuss UDL for this session, but did want to flag this as just a tool that supports an inclusive pedagogy design and approaches to developing curricula and methods to support learning environments. And this is just kind of the different areas that we want to highlight as far as how it supports in developing multiple means for learning through representation, through action and expression, through different forms of engagement. So you're welcome to kind of take a look at that further and click on that link and learn more about it. And let's see. So I'm gonna jump to. Actually, I think we have time. So I think we have a little bit of time to reflect on this question. There's one more question after this one. So this question here is, we're kind of moving now into your own ways that you engage in supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion in your classrooms. So your own experiences, you may be an educator, you may be a student. If you want to just kind of describe jot down kind of for yourself some examples of ways that you feel you've been able to engage in supporting equity, diversity, and inclusion within your spaces. So this could be through being part of specific committees, being part of specific groups, organizations, professional organizations that create engagement and support for diversity of students. You can also think about your own research and how this can support equity, inclusion, diversity, and potentially even some areas around anti-racism and justice initiatives. If you want to reflect on those and jot down some ideas for yourself. Okay. Does anyone need some additional time? All right, so you all are welcome to kind of go back and reflect on this question, but I'm going to move us to our next slide. You're welcome to share any thoughts in the chat, and then I do want to give some time for questions and discussion at the very end. So I'm going to move us to the next slide, which is to think about equity. So as we reflected back and kind of thinking back to that first slide where we kind of defined these different terms, by really thinking about inclusion and ways to support and in inclusion of diverse learners, we in many different ways can support inequity by removing barriers and developing inclusive practices that create opportunities for different individuals in different spaces. So this is important to think about as just the outcome that we see in creating equitable learning environments. And it also, in thinking about biases and kind of different forms of biases that diverse individuals may be facing, it also is an opportunity to recognize how to how to ensure that we address systemic biases and barriers and engage in opportunities to support in success. So this is really important when it comes to equity. So at this part here, we want to kind of think about how this can be achieved and ways that you promote equity within your own practice, within your own pedagogy, within your own leadership, and within your own research. How do you support equity in your own respective spaces? And some examples that we provide, if you're currently teaching, is you can think about supporting and ensuring that that you consider your specific discipline and how it might be underrepresented by specific groups. How you could ensure that you include material that reflects diverse authors, groups that have been underrepresented, that have been marginalized within your reading material, within your learning material. And there's many other ways. So if you want to think about how do you approach inclusion and how you develop approaches to ensure that you're promoting equity in your own respective learning spaces. And this is actually, I believe, our last question. So I'm happy to also just invite folks to share, but I will give everyone about a minute to kind of think about this. If you need more time, let me know, but we'll pause here and reflect on this last question. I think you're welcome to continue thinking about this question. If anyone would like to share any of their own ways that they approach promoting equity within kind of your own respective role as an educator, as a student, as different forms of leadership. I'm curious and would love to hear different strategies that you use to promote equity. Does anyone want to share? Any thoughts, reflections? If not, I'm happy to just kind of move us to the next slide, but I'll pause here if anyone wants to share.
Hi, Liz.
Hi.
Before we move on, I was just thinking on this question, I haven't really had too much of an opportunity as an educator to promote equity and inclusion, and that I haven't started teaching yet formally. So in coming here today, I think this is a really, really important component of your talk. Because reflection and coming up with ideas is definitely helpful, but putting it into action is where the meat of the whole point is. So I don't know if there's anybody here who's been teaching at least for a little while and has practices that they intentionally put into place to promote DEI. I would love to hear more about it. say specific examples. Like I see the example here, diverse authors. Like I recognize that some of my instructors use diverse authors when presenting arguments each module during the course of the term. I never thought of it as being a DEI practice, but it makes sense that it is. So like what other things are folks doing?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Heidi, for that invitation from folks. And I think that it's definitely, this is really our goal for this space, right? So I think we're all coming in with a different opportunity to kind of bring this into classrooms. Some of us are still kind of in this learning space. Others have been doing this for some time. So really welcome your invitation, Heidi, of others, and in terms of sharing your own experiences on how you've promoted this within your own respective spaces. And I do see a hand raised from Holly.
Yeah, so just as excuse me, just as a example of something I've done in the past, I used to teach ESL, and when practicing English, or when having practice questions, examples in the workbook, things like that, I would try and include when I was using names, like names that were not just Bob, Susie, that kind of thing. Also including they as a pronoun that can be used for a single person for individuals that are, non-binary or use they, them pronouns singularly, which is something that some students might not be taught if they're having very taught traditionally in ESL, but that's not exactly inclusive. So that's just something that I did in the past, just trying to make sure that for ESL that my examples were inclusive in the names that they used and the way that they employed pronouns.
Thank you, Holly. It's a great addition. And I actually did not mention that as an example. So thank you for raising kind of pronouns as another really great way to ensure inclusion and equity in our classrooms. And I see a hand raised now from Gianni. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny.
Jenny.
My pronouns are Aya, she, series, and I 100% agree with Holly. I think having a pronouns session or lesson plan in the beginning of the year with students to normalize language, vocabulary, and create a classroom culture that's safe for different students that identify in different ways is definitely something that I've seen in the classroom, but also I work at a nonprofit organization that works in schools across LAUSD and Englewood District. So it's something that we try to embed in our programming as well, which could be a little challenging for elementary and middle schools, but a lot easier to navigate in high schools. I would also include my idea, just letter. Oh, yes. Not only different learning styles, but I think that helping students understand the history behind different learning styles. So for example, if there are students that are auditory learners and learn through storytelling and oral story, I think there's a lot of power in oral story. And in QBIPOC communities, a lot of wisdom is passed through oral story. So what does it mean to also bring that aspect into the classroom to help students understand that there's different ways of learning, but that different people learn because of just ancestral patterns and cultural differentiation or approaches that inform how they pick up information as well. So really pushing our thinking when it comes to not only the different learning styles, which is very Western and great, but also understand why students learn the way they learn and really bringing in an empowering lens to learning so that students don't just see themselves as I hate memorizing things. Repetition doesn't work for me. It's probably because it wasn't meant to. And it's probably because you're not learning in the right way. What does it mean for us to really empower you and understand different ways of learning and why different ways of learning actually function for you?
Thank you, Jenny. Those are all super great examples. And I'm hearing quite a bit of just opportunities to really think about how we ensure student voice, and just thinking about the different ways that students may be more in tune to learning and ensuring that their voice is heard and that their own ways that they can support in their learning is really included and supported within kind of the learning spaces that we develop. So really, really appreciate all those thoughts, as well as just our emphasis on reflecting kind of our pronouns and honoring pronouns of students. Those are all really great examples that you all are sharing. I'm seeing in the chat, these are all great. I'm seeing Kim shared some ideas on just ensuring student-centeredness, student developed assignments, highlighting student voices, being intentional and respectful. I'm seeing Heidi's comment on encouraging students to share their own stories. So really kind of your bringing Jenny's point on storytelling and really finding ways to ensure their stories are part of their learning experience. There's a question on, there's actually a question from Heidi on, I think this is a question in response to Jenny, you're sharing. So do students encourage students to share their own stories as part of their learning experience? How do you work with folks who are shy or uncomfortable with sharing?
Sorry, I might just jump in. I was trying to write it down. Yeah, I was writing it down and I was like, this is too long. I think it would be really amazing to take the first week of school and really focus on what does it mean for us to build a community. If we know anything about social emotional learning, is that if students are in a place where they feel safe and they feel like they can understand who my peers are, who my teacher is as a human being and not just as a authority figure, they're able to really lean into learning, and they're able to really lean into failing and being okay with not doing everything well. And that comes in this SEO piece of community building and really understanding who I am as a person and like where I come from. Am I a migrant? Is my family a migrant? Like, what do my roots look like? What does it look like to be like really self-empowered with who I am and what my identity is? And I think that in that space, and that's like, you can do that in 1 or 2 days. You can learn a lot about students and leverage that for the remainder of the year, and then continue to build spaces where students are really community building and understanding what it means to normalize healthy relationships with other students, healthy relationships with their teachers, or like their assistant teacher that might be in class. So I think that those small things, which might be normal for some folks, but not for others, can really elevate like a classroom and create a space where a student is really willing and ready to work and learn.
Thank you, Jenny. Those are all great response and really appreciate it. I wish we had another hour of time with one another, because I do think, and I forewarned everyone, I think this is a challenge with the diversity statement. I mean, there's just so much we can talk about. And I do encourage everyone to look at our more thorough workbook that does provide some more examples on just ways that that we can be in support of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice within the classroom. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to cover everything today, but I do see a lot of action in the chat box and just different ways that you all are providing some insight and reflection and ideas for one another. So really appreciate you sharing that with everyone, and do welcome everyone to kind of take a look at those chat items. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, because we do want to end on time and we have about a minute left. So I want to kind of close us and thinking about just opportunities to kind of move from here, right? So this worksheet was really kind of a first kind of ticket for everyone to kind of, you're just starting your reflection on writing your diversity statement. Welcome you to kind of bring that to one of our sessions, and we're happy to be a thought partner with you on how you want to further develop your diversity statement and provide some feedback and ideas. So you're welcome to use that worksheet as a tool. And I do want to just end with a quick poll and some last minute just updates. So if I'm going to launch the poll for you folks to fill out, this poll is important for us as far as feedback and additional opportunities to further develop these sessions. So do appreciate everyone's time in completing this really quick poll that is 4 questions. So I'm going to launch that now. I'll give folks a minute. We might end about a minute late, so I apologize, but we'll try to wrap up soon. All right, okay, I think we have about 40 seconds left. Thank you all again for your, thank you, Monica. All right, so I will close the poll now. Thank you all for completing that. And if I can borrow 1 more minute of your time, I know we're at 1:01. Did want to just give a couple quick updates. We do have our appointment system that we use. So if you're not aware of this, we do have an opportunity to schedule individual appointments with any of us from the PFF team. So do encourage you to make an appointment with us if you would like to further talk about the diversity statement and just ways that we can support you in developing your diversity statement. We also have a LinkedIn page that Holly is awesome at helping us develop. She is our social media guru and has been developing a lot of great tools to stay connected with one another. One of them being our LinkedIn platform. And we also have an Instagram page. We do have 2 sessions coming up. One is actually tomorrow. And I'm helping co-host this session with Holly, who's leading it. And it's actually very relevant to our discussion today around just ensuring that we develop accessible classrooms and spaces for learners. So Holly will be leading that session tomorrow, and then another session early March on avoiding classism in the classroom. Both of these are actually very relevant to our conversation around thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So do encourage you all to join if you're able to join those sessions. And just wanted to share a couple additional ways that you can stay connected with us. And this session will be emailed out, the slides, and you do already have them available through the link in our website. So you're welcome to take a look at those and think through those questions and kind of information a little further post our session. There's a lot of other ways that you can kind of stay connected with us, our Instagram, our Twitter, our Facebook. And I think Holly will be sharing the linked tree that has all of the links to our sites. Thank you, Holly, for that. And then I just wanted to highlight a couple additional resources. So there's lots of different tools, lots of information out there. Feel free to use whatever is relevant and authentic to you. But I did want to share a couple additional resources that I welcome everyone to take a look at.